In this video, I'm going to be testing the brand new Nvidia RTX 5070 Ti in some Blender rendering scenes. We'll run Blender 4.4 and 3.6 so we can compare any speed changes that have occurred between those two Blender versions. Then we'll run some viewport tests. And finally, we'll run the Blender OpenData benchmarks on this GPU. Okay, so we'll start the Blender rendering tests here. We're going to run the 4 scenes in Blender 4.4 first, and then we'll run 3.6 afterward. Here in the preferences, you can see the 5070 Ti on optics, and we'll just click render image, and we're done. So we'll call that 10 seconds. I'll just come back in here and we'll log that result. Now we'll switch over to the barbershop scene. Same thing, we'll show the preferences, and then we'll render. Okay, this one's almost done, so we'll see how this compares. Just under 52 seconds. So we'll type that in. Next scene is the Lone Monk. So we'll switch to the Lone Monk scene. Here's the preferences showing our GPU, and we'll click render. And this one is the longest test of these 4. So you can watch the GPU temperature on the right. It looks like right now it's running at about 50 degrees, so you'll be able to see that temperature. I'll speed this up so that we don't have to sit and watch it. Okay, Lone Monk is almost done. It looks like we got up to 55 Celsius on the core temperature for the GPU. And this one took right at 2 minutes. So we'll throw that in the spreadsheet here. Make sure we're on the Lone Monk page, and we'll put in 120. We'll come compare these in just a little bit. And the next and final scene for Blender 4.4 here is the Scanland scene. And here are the preferences showing the GPU. And we'll hit render. Okay, this one's about done. It took 32.5 seconds for the 5070 Ti to render the Scanland scene. So now we'll go back to the classroom scene, and I'll reopen this in Blender 3.6, and we'll rerun the tests. And you'll see what the difference is in speed between Blender 4.4 and 3.6. Okay, so here we are on the same machine, but now we're in Blender 3.6, running the same GPU here, the 5070 Ti on optics. And we'll click render. And just like before, this one goes really fast. So we have about 10.8 seconds. Okay, we'll type that in. Next scene is the barbershop. Here's our GPU in use of optics. Let's render the image. Okay, so barbershop is done, and we have basically right at 48 seconds, so let's type that in. So let's test the long scene, the Lone Monk. So we've opened that up. Here is our GPU, and let's render the image. Okay, Lone Monk is almost done on Blender 3.6 here. Again, we're sitting at 54, 55 Celsius on the GPU. And this one took about 2 minutes and 6 seconds. And now let's look at Scanlands. Okay, here is the Scanland scene, and we're running the 5070 Ti with optics, and we'll render the image. Okay, Scanlands took about 29 seconds. Okay, we'll save the results. Before we switch over to the viewport tests, let's resort our data, and I'll just sort each one of these before we start talking about them here real quick. And at this point, you guys are probably fairly familiar with these tests, so we won't talk about them for too long here, but let's just get into it a little bit. So this is the classroom scene results. You can see all the GPUs on the screen. I still have the AMD 9070 XT highlighted in these colors here, so you can kind of compare it to that. And then let's add a green color to our new results from today. So in the classroom scene, it's such a light scene that there's probably a lot of error. The Blender 4.4 on the 5070 Ti was just slightly faster than 3.6, and you can see that these basically tied with the 4070 Ti Super, but there's also only a couple seconds between these GPUs and the 4090. At this point, this test is becoming a little bit less useful. The only other notable thing here really is that the 5070 Ti does beat the 5070 by at least 30% in this test. So that seems to be kind of what we would expect. Let's go to barbershop scene now, and again, I'll highlight our new GPU results in green. On this one, so the barbershop scene is kind of in between the classroom and the lone monk as far as render times go. But we can see that in this test, Blender 3.6 actually beats Blender 4.4 on this GPU by 4 seconds. And this is still actually a couple seconds, about 1.2 seconds slower than the 4070 Ti Super. So as far as raw ray tracing speed, it kind of looks like without all the AI tricks, the 50 series is not much faster than the 40 series of the same tier. And then obviously this whole time, compare these to the AMD results if you'd like to, which are still highlighted. But these tests are really making the 4070 Super and the 4070 Ti Super look like they're still really a great option for this stuff. The 50 series is really not making a strong showing on these. Okay, next we'll look at the lone monk results here. So these ones kind of oppose the last ones. It looks like Blender 4.4 was 6 seconds faster than 3.6 on this one, so that's a little bit flipped from the barbershop scene. What's notable here is that AMD's GPUs definitely perform the best on this benchmark for some reason. The 9070 XT in this scene is just about 11.5 seconds slower than the 5070 Ti in the worst test, and just about 17 seconds slower in the better test. For the price difference, that's pretty compelling there. On this one, yeah, your 5070 Ti still is just tying the 4070 Ti Super, so not a lot of an upgrade there. You have the same VRAM size. Obviously, some uses like gaming, the 50 series will be faster if you use AI software, but for this stuff, it doesn't look like it has a lot of an advantage. And then finally here for the Scanlans, let's look at these green highlights. So again, on this one, Scanlans is kind of like barbershop. It's a little bit in the middle of the classroom and the lone monk. So they're kind of the middle. The 5070 Ti still basically tying the 40 series GPUs of the 70s class. So the Ti Super and the 4070 Super. But again, strangely, Blender 3.6 is faster than Blender 4.4 on this test. So it seems like for some reason, these middle complexity scenes, Blender 3.6 is just a bit faster. In this case, it's about 10%. So it's notable. Even these results, for instance, from the 4090 from before, show the same situation where 3.6 was actually faster than Blender 4 when I ran that test originally. So something in the optics API is not using the GPUs quite as fast. Like always, I'll take screenshots of these and put them in posts on my page so you guys can refer to them. And the next test here will be the viewport test. We can only run it in 4.4. That scene was made in a Blender 4.3 file, so it doesn't work properly if I go back to Blender 3.6. So we'll switch over to that. You can see the old results here, and then I'll go over and get that scene loaded up. Okay, so here we are. We're back to Blender 4.4, and this is the Minotaur viewport scene that I've been using. We have the 5070 Ti with optics selected. Now keep in mind that doesn't affect viewport performance itself because the viewport shaders are not the same as the cycle shaders, but we'll see how the viewport performs here. It's definitely more responsive than some of the other slower cards we've tested lately. There's a little bit of lag, but not much at all. We'll restart the animation here, and we'll just play this without moving the camera. And it looks like we're getting a solid 14 to 15 frames per second on this. And if I start to move the camera around, it dips a little bit, but we're holding at about 14 to 15 on average. So we'll call it 14 because there are some dips. We'll compare it to these other recent GPUs soon. And I'll say that I never thought GPUs affected the viewport frame rate, but it definitely does seem that that's the case. So let's go look at the recent results. So let's plug this in here at 14 seconds. And then let's just sort these, and we want to sort them largest to smallest on this one because this is frame rate. So here are the 5070 Ti results, and they're kind of what we would expect. 30% faster than the 5070, and that makes sense. About 3 times faster than the Arc B580. But interestingly, we only get about 1.5 seconds or so in the viewport frame rate over the 9070 XT from AMD. So that is maybe one of the most interesting comparisons are these two cards right here. So the 9070 XT is not necessarily stunning at rendering speed, but it's good at viewport speed. So keep that in mind if you are shopping around for these. But that's it for this viewport test. I'll probably start doing some more like EV tests in the future with rendering and with viewport stuff, but for now that's about all I can get out of this one since it's so subjective. And now we'll run the Blender Open benchmark and we'll compare that to our other recent results. Okay, so there's not really as much to show on the screen with the Open benchmark, but let's just start with version 4.4 here. We'll click next. So now it's gonna let us pick which device to test. We're gonna test the 5070 Ti, and we'll start the benchmark. And these will take just a second to start up, and we'll kind of compare these. There's a lot of debate about whether or not the OpenData benchmark is working properly or not, but we can kind of see if our numbers make sense with the speeds that we see with rendering. I think what's nice about this test, though, is that it doesn't have to open Blender itself. It's just a command line software, so it takes out a little bit of the system issues and probably takes some of our possible error out from using remote desktop for these tests. And somebody told me that in these tests, we might want to just use the summary of the scores instead of talking about each one of the 3. So I'll plug in the 3 different scene scores and we'll let the spreadsheet add it up. But we'll just kind of use that summary score as our comparison. Okay, so the classroom scene here is just about to finish up. And then we'll go through and run Blender 3.6 after this as well. And that's done. So the scores on here are in samples per minute. We have 3682. Let's just plug these in one at a time here. 1998 and 1962. We'll compare those to the other ones here in just a second. Okay, so I close that out. Let's just rerun this test in Blender 3.6 and see if there is any difference in this test. And I have to download these benchmarks, so I'll pause this. Okay, it downloaded the scenes. So now let's select the 5070 Ti one more time. And we'll start the benchmark. And I'll let these run here, and then we'll jump to the end and talk about the scores. Okay, the classroom benchmark here is just about done. So now let's go log these results. I can already see they're higher. So we have 4274, 2280, and we have 2093. Let's see, let's sort these by highest total. So now you can just see the ones I've tested. I have not gone back and run the 5070 yet. So what we really want to look at is the total score here. Most of them are run in Blender 4.4. It looks like here in this test, the 5070 Ti is significantly faster. Blender 3.6 is better for the 5070 Ti on this benchmark than Blender 4.4. So that's these two results here, which is pretty interesting. Also, I don't know how reliable this benchmark is anyway, but it looks like the 5070 Ti's worst score is basically a little bit more than double versus the 9070 XT. The better result in Blender 3.6 is almost triple the 9070 XT. And keep in mind, these are points, so higher is better. And you can see the difference here between the 4090 and the 5070 Ti. So there is a little bit of a gap there still. We definitely don't have 4090 speed from the 5070s. Normally, I would run the Cinebench test, but it does not support 50 series GPUs or 9000 series AMD cards, and it never supported Intel GPUs at all. So until they have a new version of that, we probably won't be able to run any Cinebench. At this point, that's it for the tests that I have. But in the future, people have been asking me to add a lot of benchmarks, and I'm going to try to make as many as I possibly can. But we're going to try to do some video editing, some AI processing, and then eventually we'll have Unreal Engine benchmarks and whatever else we want to do, really. So let me know what else you want to see. It's going to take me a little bit to put all these together, while I'm also working on animations and more of these test videos. So just watch for it over time. But that's it for this one. I really appreciate you hanging out and watching these, and I hope they were helpful. So we'll see you next time.